Our guest today is Alejandro Monteverde. He's a great film director who has a film coming out now about the life of Mother Cabrini. The film is called Cabrini. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and Mexican-American filmmaker Alejandro Monteverde joins me now. Alejandro is best known for his work as a director, writer, and producer on the 2023 film The Sound of Freedom and a very popular 2006 film called Bella. Angel Studios and Alejandro had monumental success this past summer with the anti-child trafficking movie The Sound of Freedom, which made history at the box office by becoming the highest grossing independent film of 2023. Alejandro and Angel Studios reteamed for the new movie Cabrini. The movie tells the story of Francesca Cabrini, later to be called Mother Frances Cabrini, then Saint Frances Cabrini, the first U.S. citizen to be canonized. Alejandro is here with us today to talk about his life, his career, the faith and values that sustain him, and why he wanted to bring the story of Mother Cabrini to a wide audience and his hopes for the film. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking film director Alejandro Monteverde. Alejandro Monteverde is our guest. We're talking about his opening film, March 8th around the country. We'll be opening Cabrini. Thanks so much for coming on Personally Speaking. My first question is just, you are an accomplished filmmaker and successful at what you touch. I'm wondering why and how you came to say, I want to do a film on the life of Mother Cabrini.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do feel this was not a film that I was not looking for this story. I maybe dare to say that the story found me. I didn't know anything about Mother Cabrini. I was not even aware about anything. I didn't know anything about her. I got a phone call from one of my mentors, Justus Wolfington, who I knew. By the time he called me, he said, "Hey, I want you to read the script on Mother Cabrini." Right there, I had flashbacks of sometimes hearing her name when I will be talking to him throughout the years. Justus Wolfington was one of the first persons to bet on me. He was one of the executive producers on Bella, my first film. So when he called and he said, "Hey, I want you to read the script," I was going to read it just as as I admire Justus, so just kind of like as a favor to him.
Mm-hmm.
I automatically, in my head said, I'm not going to make a movie about a nun.
Right.
And nothing, obviously, I'm a practicing Catholic, but, I just couldn't figure out how you can make, why, how do you make a movie that is entertaining?
Yes.
About a nun. I've seen the other movies, which are normally horror films and things like that.
Yes, right. Right.
So obviously, I knew there was not a horror film. I knew this was, a film to, pay tribute to her. So I kind of had a prejudice. Now, that helped me when I made the movie. The same prejudice that I had, I knew when I say yes to jump in on this journey, that the audiences and the world was going to have the same prejudice. And as a filmmaker, I knew that one of my greatest challenge was to break that prejudice right away. Yeah. So when I read the script, it took like around 10 pages for me to understand the wisdom and the power of this woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized right there, there was one line that really captured me right away that Mother Cabrini said, and it was right on the first 10 pages of the script. She said, you can serve your purpose or you can serve your weakness. And it spoke really, direct to me. I don't know anybody that doesn't have both.
Yes.
I think most people that when you talk to them, they share their purposes, and if you know them really well, you may get lucky enough for them to also share their weakness. Which in many ways is what unites us as a human race.
Yeah.
So right there, she grabbed my attention, and as a character, that's how she was in real life. Right away, she will walk in one room, and within like 2 or 3 minutes, she will capture you and grab you, and that's how she was able to accomplish so much.
Alejandro, you've spoken many times about her as a great entrepreneur, and of all the things I knew about her, I never understood why would she be an entrepreneur. Tell us, what do you mean by that?
Well, she built an empire, as big as the Rockefeller and the Vanderbilts at that time. It was a worldwide empire. And when I mean an empire, is she opened hospitals and orphanages and schools. And for that requires a lot of, money to be, going back and forward at a time where it's not like today that you just press a button, it's like you have to be continuously be practicing your entrepreneurship, your business side of your personality. So, in one of the books I read that some people refer to her as the businesswoman. They're the businesswoman, because she, in order to, it does requires a business mind in order to make all these deals, buying properties, building, dealing with, all the challenges that each country might have. Not everybody was as welcoming to her habit per se.
Right.
So she was in constant battle, but at the same time, she also was in this surrender mode. Her faith always was her greatest weapon. And there's in many situations, we didn't put any of this on the film, but there was a lot of miracles that were happening that people were noticing, very, in many ways, if you want to call them supernatural things that she was a woman of power, I would say, but not the power that it's not the world power. She had a lot of spiritual power, and people could see that in her eyes, and there was a fire for her.
You're saying spiritual power that led, though, to a worldly power in terms of being able to accomplish great things through her spiritual power. Alejandro, I want to ask you, it's amazing time-wise that your film is coming out of at a moment when we are very, very much into the issue of immigration and migration. People in a parish like mine on Long Island, 3,000 families, and they'll talk sometimes about all those people coming across the border. And when they talk about all those people, they really aren't talking about people. They're talking about a group. And I think of them as individuals, as children of God. I mentioned that because I'm the grandson of an Italian immigrant. And my grandfather told me that when he came to America, Italians were considered lesser than human beings. Mother Cabrini, Italian herself, was able to elevate people's view of the immigrant. Your film is so topical because it's so easy to depersonalize people who cross our border and come to this country. Are you hoping that we can start to see the humanity, whether you're Italian or Spanish or Chinese, that we won't lose sight of the fact that we're equally children of the same God?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is interesting is that Mother Cabrini was not about immigration. She was about the immigrant.
Right.
Which is kind of different. She was about the human being. And there's a line on the film that she was questioning people, how could you sleep knowing that there is people living in those conditions in the street? So, she is called the patron of the immigrant. Yeah. So I know that unfortunately we live in a world that is very divided politically, and anything, a terminology goes through the political
Yes.
lens, unfortunately ends up hurting, people in many ways.
Yeah.
So what I love about her story is she always understood that. She always understood it was about the human dignity. It was about the immigrant itself. And she saw everybody as children of God. She didn't see one race above another race. She was able to just, see through any label. And that's what made her story so powerful and so universal. She was able to work with everybody.
You've said in
And
other places that this woman was not specifically political, but didn't she have to, in getting anywhere in America, deal with politicians? And
oh yeah,
did she do that
yeah,
well?
yeah. She did very well because she was a woman that, in my humble opinion, carried the truth with her. And she spoke with, in many ways, with authority, but it was not her authority. She
Mm,
always understood, you know, what she was representing. And she was fighting. She was very defiant to the point that she was defying death itself. The doctors continued to tell her, you have 2 more years to live, but every 2 years she will gain another 2 years, and so on until, she lived a very prolific life, and she was very, very, that's why for me, the way I shot this movie was very important because, we're giving one life and we can do with that life, it's our choice. It's like painting an art, and she lived her life very artful. In my the way when I read her story, I say her life is very cinematic, and I
mhm.
want to be able to capture that, and I want to be able to break the prejudice of what people might think when you think of a story about a nun. This is a
Right.
story about a woman that happens to be a nun that really, took her conviction to heart and fought really, really hard to elevate human dignity. And that's what, that's an absolute truth. She saw human beings. Uh, and I do think that that's what it was politicians and all men and all people. And this was a time that more of the institutions were controlled or run by men. So she had to face and constantly, all these institutions that were led by men, and she kind of had to constantly fight men in this case. But also she was able to, create an army, of women that became worldwide. She opened institutions all around the world, and yes, every country has its own challenges, its own political views, its own. This was times where were very tough times. In Well, every time is tough, but
Alejandro,
here.
let me ask you because I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from you because you studied her life. Uh, Alejandro Monteverde is our guest. He's the director of this great film coming out called Cabrini. Whether it's the story of the children in Fatima or the Bernadette and Lourdes, we like to believe that men who are sometimes tough to deal with and who have control back then, as they did in the time of Mother Cabrini, that secular men will make it difficult, but certainly religious men will make it easier for a person of spiritual conviction like Mother Cabrini. Am I right or wrong that the men who ran the church weren't necessarily easy on her, and she had to deal not just as with secular powerful men, but even men in the church who might not take seriously this little religious woman? How did she deal with the men of the church?
Well, she was one of the first women to lead a mission overseas without the help of men.
Uh,
So then she was you know, under the microscope to see if she was gonna be able to achieve what she proposed. So there
mm,
was a lot of resistance in the beginning, and yes, there was a lot of you know men within the church that got on her way in the beginning. However, the Pope became her ally. And, the Pope really played a big role on helping her. And we see that in the film. So she was the kind of woman that was understood how to create bridges, how to work together, not, her purpose and her ambition. If she, it was the good ambition. It was the ambition to help those in need. And that in itself, she would always put above her own, if you want to call it, ego. She didn't have an ego. She would do whatever it took to help those in need, to fight for those. And if she needed to build a bridge, it was trying to figure out how to, get to be able to create an atmosphere where people could actually help, especially the children.
Okay, Alejandro, I want to go back to something else you said because it touches on the roots of your goodness and what you're trying to accomplish. So, listen to this quote from our friend Alejandro. I believe that being a filmmaker is not just a profession, but also an opportunity to make a difference. And then you want to say, I wanted to make films in which people love more and judge less. When someone says something like that, which is such a statement of values, you see behind me a picture of my mom and dad. I know that the family of origin is so important. I am who I am because of the seeds that were planted in me by these great parents. In the same way, you come from a family. I'm just wondering, when you look back on your parents and what they taught you or how they taught you, what did your parents do right, Alejandro, in raising you?
Hmm. Um, well, first, I think they love me
Uh,
unconditionally. And I think that play a big part. And they lived a life by example. I always said, if I could be half the father that my father was to me, or half the husband that my father was to my mother, I did good.
yeah.
So they had a great example. And to me, that's actions speak more than any words.
Mhm.
So I would say that. I'm sorry. That's that.
No, that says it all.
Yeah.
Did the faith come from them, or did you come to that on your own?
No. It can't. It comes from them. It comes
Uh,
from them.
okay.
It comes
Now,
from them. I
for those
think
that
that's
don't,
a great thing to inherit.
yeah, it sure is. That's a great legacy. For those who don't know, Alejandro not only comes from a great family with great values, but now he's making a family with Ali and their beautiful children. You know, every weekend I get to celebrate weddings, and so that I can speak from the heart about the couple, I say to them, look, I don't want to give a generic talk on love and marriage. I want to talk about why you love each other and why you're getting married. So I say to each couple, write me an essay. Why is this the one that you think God has intended for you? You're married to Ali. What has Ali got that makes you say, this is the person God put in my life?
Hmm. So very deep questions. You know, it's there is those moments in your life where you can look back. I always say you can see God's hands a lot easier when you look back into your life. It's kind of hard to see it when you're living it in the present. Um, but when you look back and you start seeing when a good analogy that I was telling my kids the other day, it's I take my dog for walks.
Okay.
And I told my son, I say, look, if she could talk, my dog, her name is Africa, if Africa could talk and I'm going to take the leash off, and she was wise, she would tell me, no, keep the leash on. Because if you take the leash off, I may run after a squirrel and get run over by a car or take
Right.
off and get lost. And in many ways, I around 20 something years ago, that's kind of when I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems like a long time, but yeah, it's around 20 years ago. Wow. Um, I ask in many ways, to, you know, to be on a leash, meaning to just to, give to have God have, some control on my life. Every day I want to give more control, and that's the goal, right?
Right.
And looking back, I started doing changes, which is kind of like I started allowing myself to be guided. It's like instead of just myself deciding I'm going to take a left or a right on difficult situations, I will, pray about it, and then I'll make a decision. And when I look back and I see those tiny decisions, that's what led in many ways for me to meet my wife. It was a series of events, series of changes. I always say, this when you make a little change, even if it's a 10-degree change, if you look at it into 20 years from now, it's the difference between arriving to Hawaii or Japan in the long run. It's just like you make it right here, but in the long terms, it just goes dramatically in two opposite, almost you could look at like it almost in opposite directions if you do that change here in the long run. It's massive. And I started, if I look back and I look at all those tiny changes, how one led to another one, and eventually that's how I ended up meeting my wife. And I knew it's this, I know this sounds like a cliche, but sometimes cliches, they're called cliches because it's almost an absolute truth in many ways.
Right.
I the first time, we got to talk. At that time, I should go back. At that time, I was writing. I was keeping a journal, and I remember writing in the journal, say, "Today I met my wife," and I knew it in that moment that was my wife. How did I know that? It's always, you could. That's another cover. That's sort of the things that we just know.
Isn't that great? That's one. Thank you. Alejandro Monteverde is our guest, and we're talking about his film Cabrini, but we're all talking about him and the man he is and how he became that man. He's both son and brother and husband and father. I need to ask you, when this movie opens in March, you've never had problems with the people. The people come and they love your films, but the other people who get to comment on the films are the critics of the world. Does it matter to you what critics say? Or do you basically make the product of the film and say, here's my message, I put it before the world, and I'm not going to be influenced for better or worse by the critics. I know what I've made, I know what I believe, here it is. What do critics mean to you?
Well, I wish I didn't care about the critics. It requires a lot of wisdom to not care about the critics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're part of our industry. It's like if you're a chef, it's like you're cooking, and the critics, it's as almost the expert of tasting your food. Little by little, as you're getting older, and you're getting, I always compare life with a glass of wine, and you notice that you already drink the half of the wine. You decide to then really enjoy every sip.
Mm-hmm.
And now as I'm getting older, I care a little bit less and less, and I care more about making great cinema
Mm.
for everybody, including the critics. But if they don't connect with it, I'm okay with it now. I just continue to. I'm a student. I'm a film student. I love cinema. I study cinema. I live cinema every day, and every
Mm.
day I just want to become a better filmmaker. And I always say that maybe some critics may not like my work today, but I don't make movies for today. I always try to figure out to just make stories that hit universal themes. And maybe some of my films are not very popular today. Maybe in the future, uh, you know, they may like my films. But I'm just right now trying to continue to tell stories, and to continue to every day becoming a better storyteller through the power, because I believe we listen with our eyes. So it's how can we constantly create, powerful visuals. And
I love what you just said about you make it for today. I often think, I can plant the seed as a homilist in church, and no one seems to have an impact, but it can, in time, I hope, touch people's lives. We had years ago a fundraiser for disabled children, and I invited the film director Frank Capra to come, and we showed his movie "It's a Wonderful Life." I made that in 1946. The audience in this particular night we showed the film were insanely happy to see the film, tears and laughter. But he said to me, he said, Jim, when that came out in 1946, the critics savaged that film. So he said, to be in the 1970s and see that the film still has legs and still has meaning is a beautiful thing for me as a filmmaker to see. So what I'm praying for, Alejandro, is that you stay around for a long time so that 50 years from now, you can see how much they still love and maybe even more fully appreciate your film.
Yeah.
I want to thank Alejandro Monteverde for being with us, a wonderful film director and writer. Alejandro, I used to head up an organization called the Christophers, and when I was director, I was struck by their motto, which was better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And this film about Mother Cabrini coming out in March 2024, that's what she did. Instead of cursing the darkness, she was that candle that lit the world. But in so many ways, because you bring her message to a wide audience, you are that same guy who, instead of cursing the darkness, lights candle after candle and gives hope and inspiration. So thank you for the films you make. Thank you for the man you are. And thank you so much for being with us and Personally Speaking. You're a gift and a grace, and we're so grateful to have had you on.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody, we're still an independent film, with a great distributor, Angel Studios, but the first week, it's the most important week for people to come see the film, because that's what buys us more time to stay in theaters longer and longer. So I invite everybody. Our billboards are the people, people coming to watch the film. They live in the theater, and they start creating this chain of word of mouth.
Good.
So
let's listen to Alejandro and get that word out, because that's the way to make this film successful. Thank you, my friend.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me for any reason, you can write me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You probably listen to this program on the Catholic channel, channel 129. You can also watch us on YouTube at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.